from Austin, Texas, and I was inspired to talk about this conscious sexuality as it relates to conception and, yeah, just some interesting, I guess, energetic concepts around sexuality, especially conception, which is quite fascinating. So I remember getting some education around this from the famous book series, the Ringing Cedar series, or the Anastasia series, she's an enlightened being that lives in the tundra of the USSR, out in nature, living off nature, and she did a conscious conception of her son, and in detail it was written about in these books that are kind of rare, in the Anastasia series. So it it also is a good reminder of how this isn't really discussed or like mainstream information. It's it needs to become the new normal, because it seems like we're just like not being very mindful of conception when creating a child. And even if the child isn't created, there is something created always, and it's usually something that the woman carries, um energetically, whether it's includes a child creation or just in the energetics of what's being created. So I read a fact today that said that more than half of unwanted pregnancies of young women are caused by men in their 20s. And I thought that was interesting. It kind of makes sense because that's when usually young men are, got their testosterone roaring and ready to go, and they're kind of not haven't matured yet or refined themselves or tamed their testosterone and their chemistry to the point where they're able to be more conscious with it. But it's also kind of eye-opening too to realize, wow, all that testosterone really ends up taking a toll when more than half of pregnancies are from someone in their 20s. Um, and usually the woman is younger, they said. So she might be in her teens. And so, anyway, very eye opening. I think that's something we need to try to improve. Just culturally and societally, it would be good to overcome that one because it's wreaking a lot of havoc. Oh boy. So, in our culture, there's not a lot probably thought about it. I would be curious to see the statistics of consciously conceived children as opposed to, the opposite of that, where it's like, oops, or, you know, not necessarily expecting it, but it's happening, and there really wasn't like all this build up energy into creating this child. And there's a big difference in a child that is conceived consciously versus those that are not. So I think, if you would like to be mindful about it and more intentional about it, it can really pay off. So naturally, the energy that's created from, say, like a mindful, conscious conception experience, that kind of energy is a much higher vibration from which that child is going to be conceived and grow. And you can imagine how different that is from a child that's conceived where maybe the woman doesn't even get to have an orgasm, but she still got pregnant. Doesn't that suck? Poor thing. Make sure that doesn't happen, guys. There's let's see, other versions of this might be where if you're not being mindful of the pregnancy, it could be that, maybe it was just kind of a like not planned at all. It just sort of happened. It could be that it just came from maybe more of a lusty place, or even maybe of a kind of an energy of taking, or maybe the woman who's, conceiving this child is not really fully on board, or had a lot of reservations and maybe went along with it anyway, or there can be any number of energies that are present at that conception that are less than ideal and thus lower the vibration from which that child is getting introduced to the world, and then it's multiplying and growing with this lower vibrational energy. So it's just something to be mindful of, for us to realize, there's a big difference there. So, what was really fascinating about the Anastasia series when she started talking about this is they went through this whole preparation period to build up to when she was ovulating, and then they were, gonna do it. And so I remember that she had him not release, as far as ejaculation. And I don't remember the amount of time. I'm trying to remember. I want to say it was, I mean, the longer the better, because the more powerful that ejaculate's going to be, and the best choice of that child being the winner is going to, come through. And it might have been a several months, honestly, for ideal situations, several months of that building up, um, of him not ejaculating until that moment of conception, which they timed. And so you can imagine, like, this is like a huge mindful conception example. So, in doing so, you can imagine, like, say, a typical American guy who's maybe i- uneducated about ejaculation and is, say, ejaculating every day, and then, depleting his resources there and the amount of sperm choices that would be competing for that egg. Say he's ejaculating every day, and then say on the seventh day there's a conception. He's got a lot smaller number going towards that egg on that seventh day than he would have if he hadn't ejaculated in those 7 days. There would be a lot bigger pool of sperm that were competing for that egg, which means a better outcome. So if you have, say, a million sperm going towards that egg, and then there's one winner, compared to, say, 1,000 sperm going towards that egg and having one winner, the winner of the million is going to be a much higher vibration and, stronger and all that, compared to that one coming out of a smaller pool of sperm. So that in and of itself is a huge thing to note. And so anyway, I just remember, being fascinated by her talking about how she made him build up that sperm count so that the most powerful life force, sperm, would win and get that egg without any depletion or compromise there. There would be no, because that way the life force energy is building up, building up, building up, as opposed to being depleted every day if he's ejaculating regularly. So, um, he did that, and then they timed it, and then obviously that ejaculation was like massive and powerful. There was a lot more life force energy there from whence it came, And because it was intentional and planned and all that, that all that energy went into that mindfulness went into that child, who of course is an amazing child and beyond the typical, Joe on the street for sure. Whereas I'm comparing that to, in America here, where a lot of times it's not planned at all. There's no consciousness contributing to the life of that child as to what kind of child they'd like to manifest together. What are the characteristics of that child? What gender they would prefer? And all these things that could go into that process of manifesting the child you want, as compared to sort of the lottery of just getting what ends up happening, because there was just this fly by night affair, or occasion where they got together and it might have only lasted like 10 minutes, even, but then this, life was started from that. And so anyway, I'm just trying to kind of bring some awareness to the energy in which that child is conceived. Like, some might be more passionate than others in that energy that's present at that moment. There might be love present. And believe me, the child that comes from a couple that is in love compared to a couple that's not in love is going to be a huge difference in the energy that's created in conceiving that child. Um, And we can take it even more layers. Then there's maybe two people who don't even really know each other that well, is going to be a lower vibration than that couple who's in love. So, yeah, there's a huge difference there in the. So, my obviously, the inspiration is that if you're going to go to all the trouble of bringing new life into this world and all the responsibility that that involves, because I know we tend to get all la la fantasy, about having a baby, and it's just all exciting and everything. And then we don't really think about, oh my gosh, my life is completely changing. All of a sudden, my time is not my own anymore. I can't even sleep a normal night's sleep anymore. You're feeding the baby with your body, ideally, through breastfeeding. And there's just all you have to just you're naturally micromanaging that child's life, until they can be more independent. And I know this very well because my youngest brother was born when I was 10, and I kind of became the secondary mother and helped raise him and contributed a lot to his childhood. And I remember, like, our life, my mom and I, who, were the majority of the caretakers there. Um, our lives just completely changed. We didn't have all that freedom we were used to, and couldn't just do what we wanted to when we wanted to anymore. And so, it's like I got a real big wake up call very early in life, not to be all googly eyed about having a baby. That, it's something I decided that I wasn't going to do it unless I had a really solid partnership in place. And, just finances in place and all that, like, if I'm going to do it, I do want to do it right. And, my parents were more the fly by night kind, typical American situation. And it was a surprise baby for sure. And she was 30. So that was considered late, back then. Whereas now women are doing it when they're 40, and, in their 30s in general. Um, and so, if you're going to bring a new life into the world, you might as well do it right, doing it mindfully and with the best, highest vibrational energy as possible. And, plan it and time it, and be with someone that you really admire and care about and are in love with, because that's the genetics, that's half the genetics of the child is going to be that partner. So if you don't really like your partner or like their characteristics or their genetics, then you might want to think through that again. And so I was just finding this fascinating as I was going down this rabbit hole of thinking about all this. And I was like, wow, it's funny how I'm not really hearing very many conversations around this conscious conception idea, which would totally make sense for best results, just like anything. Some planning goes into it, some timing goes into it, some manifestation energy of what would we like to create together, what kind of a child would we like, and all that stuff. That does, make a difference. And especially the energy from which that child is conceived makes a huge difference, because that's the first initial energy that life form is. It's sort of like its default or its foundation. And so, you want it to come from love, ideally, and you want it to be mutually beneficial and planned on, and um, something that you're looking forward to, that you're prepared for. All those good things, is definitely going to be a higher vibration than if you're just flying by the seat of your pants and made a mistake, or you're really not prepared for it. It's going to totally hijack your life or whatever. And I'm a believer that two wrongs don't make a right. So just because you conceived doesn't mean having the child is the noble thing to do necessarily. And that's just my opinion. Um, and I feel like sometimes it's actually better if that young mother or that naive couple or whatever it waits until they're actually ready to take on all that it entails to raise a child. I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors by having unfit parents raise children. Um, and, it can definitely hijack your life plan too, as far as career and education and whatnot. And I'm more of a believer that those things need to come into place first, ideally, so that you're not just trapped in a lower financial vibration or opportunity vibration, which kind of sticks with you until you have the time to make up for it later in life, which isn't easy. I know my mom did that because back in the day, they it was common. Both my parents dropped out of college and got married and went to work, and then they got married, and then they had me. And so especially my mom was very aware of how that limited her, and she way later in life, when she was in 40 and went back to school to become a nurse, and it took 8 years to get all the prerequisites and all the nursing program finished, because she did it one step at a time, in addition to the job that she was already working full time and raising, us. And that was just a lot of work, to go back and do that and kind of reinvent her life. And it totally paid off. But I have to say, I don't think I would have had that kind of bandwidth or stick to itiveness to do that at 40. And kudos to her. She's the year of the ox, so she was able to get through that. But I tell you, that would have just been so unattractive to me, the way I'm rigged to do that at that late stage in life. It's so much easier when you get that education out of the way when you're young, and get your career started and have a little bit of a foundation to go off of, before you start bringing any children into the world. So, um, yeah. So, anyway, I just wanted to share that today because I think it's really a powerful thing to think about. And, if you're young enough and listening to this, and you haven't had your children yet, or you're thinking of having another one, then why not, make it a whole family affair, and a couple situation where you really like manifest and think through it all and build up the energy and all that life force energy and make it a whole ceremonial experience that's sacred and lay that foundation of beauty in your child's life because it'll show up in their countenance, in their personality, in their disposition. And, why not have enlightened children that way? Right? I mean, just saying. I mean, if we want to have enlightened children, we have to have enlightened parents to conceive them in a way that is conducive to that. All right, that's it for today, beloveds.